Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Wilder Ride Listeners Lounge. It's not a place where we look at a movie 1 minute at a time. It's actually where we break down a person's life one moment at a time. It's a little bit different for us here in season 3, and we've really been enjoying meeting all of the wonderful guests we've had for you in season 3. I'm your host, Alan Sanders, and once again joined by my co-host, Walt Murray. Walt, how you doing, buddy?
Hey man, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I am on top of the world. I exchanged some text messages with you earlier today. It's about 2 weeks ago, we had an episode come out, or we talked about an episode with our mountain climber friend, Ryan Waters. And I spent the opening just, sort of ruminating about how I had a 12-year-old PC. It takes forever to reboot if it has to reboot. It's fun. It's basically getting slower and slower and slower no matter what I do at this point without a full replacement. But, 4 kids, all in college, 2 finally out. I've still got one that just started, one that's a senior this year. It's not like money flows from the money tree like our kids thought. And I said, God, I just want a new machine. But my wife is like, you can't have one. You're not allowed. Not yet. Too expensive. Guess what?
You finally broke down and got one.
Yes. And the wife said, you know what? I am so sick of you bitching. I'm so sick of you complaining. You know what? You haven't bought anything for yourself in a while. Yeah, the lockdowns caused a slowdown in your side business. But you know what? That's going to pick up. We got to have faith. And you know what? Maybe it's a sign. Maybe you've got to invest something. Just charge it. And I hate debt. You know me. If I don't have the cash, I don't go buy it. But I decided to go ahead and there was a great deal. The desktop was about $1,900. I got it for $1,100 on sale. I think you're going to see a lot of cool sales this time of year, but man, I am cooking with gasoline, let me tell you.
Well, I think that was a good investment for you because I know how much time you spend editing and not just for this, but the other stuff you do. I think it's going to pay off for you.
I'm like on cloud 9. I was giving you some examples, like when I would run, let's say, the audio compressor to help kind of round out the audio file, kind of make it fill in some of the gaps with a recording. We've got internet guests and stuff, and it just tries to flesh it out a little bit. And when I did that, it used to take about probably on the compression side, maybe 5 or 6 minutes to do one track. So if I had 3 tracks, you, me, and the guest, that'd be about 15 minutes. I did it in less than a minute per track with this new machine. In fact, it was about a minute for all 3. When I run the match loudness at the end, we've just lost the entire audience. Like, I don't care. But I mean, that would take 27 minutes, right? 27 minutes. I would just have to go. And heaven forbid I open up anything in the background lest the computer crash for having too many things running at once. Well, what I would do is I ran it this last time with the new machine. It took 1 minute. 1. I am blown away.
Well, and before I got involved with this podcast, I just thought podcasts were magic. 2 guys sit down in front of microphones, talk for a little while, and send it out. But right. I've learned an awful lot about how that is not true.
Well, there are probably some podcasts out there that sound that way. I'm not sure that that's how you're supposed to do it.
There are a couple. Yeah, that's not how you're supposed to do it. You're right. But and I'm excited for you because I just always feel bad about how much time you have on the, invested on the editing side and all my dropping things on tables and, all that kind of stuff that you've got to take care of and get out of the show, which may be entertaining for some people.
Well, what's crazy is I didn't hear it while we were recording. It was like they snuck in there. I was so focused on our guest. And that's usually the case. I usually tend to listen to the guests more than I listen to you anyway. But
I think that's a wise thing.
When I went back, I was like, what is going on? I thought maybe I had something going on in the background. I was like, nope, that's just Walt. He's got his meaty palms hitting that desk every time he wants to make a point.
Well, I always try to, watch. I even have what's called Audacity, which we use to record. I have that up, and I always try to watch for weird noises that pop up or my levels getting weird or anything like that, just to make it easier on you. and I didn't notice anything. So I'll just have to go back and take a look at that. But
That's all right. It was one of those things that was so subtle. It was almost always embedded with you talking. So a lot of times I just couldn't do anything about it. The thump was just there because you were probably just making a point. Maybe you put your hand on the desk, you reach for a pen, you were just talking, didn't think about it. And just because we're at the stand, it was just picking it up as a bass thump. Anyway.
It's all those disciplines. Well, hey, I'm kind of relieved about something.
What's that?
From the date that we are today, next Tuesday, the election will be over.
Yay!
So
well, wait.
The day this comes out,
will it?
Well, the voting part will be over.
The day on the calendar will have passed.
Right. All the legal wranglings and fighting and gnashing of teeth on one side and celebrations on the other will not be over. But at least we'll be past election day. So I'm hoping that once it's done, whoever wins, whoever loses, that we can become a little bit more civil with everybody again.
Now, you say a week from today, we're recording on a Wednesday, but the episode actually will drop, ironically,
on election
day. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. So
I bet our guest cannot wait to weigh in.
Yes, I am sure. Yeah, I think a lot of people will be really happy to listen to this episode and have a distraction for a little while.
You know what I was going to say?
Craziness.
If we can provide something that has zero to do with what's going on every other news channel, radio channel, talk channel, on social media, if we could do something that's fun, entertaining, and a distraction, then maybe we will have succeeded in something on this day, November the 3rd, this release date for this episode.
We will have accomplished something in this life that is actually productive for once.
I'll take it.
Yeah, I will too. I will be a happy man. So, well, and I'm really excited about today and the person we have on as our guest today.
Well, before we kind of drop the name and all that, we'll bring him to the stage in a minute. I want you to actually explain how in the world did you have a network of relationships that allowed us to find our guest today?
Well, you know the old outkick your coverage saying, or you have friends who are out of your league and that sort of thing. I've got a friend from high school who I managed to trick into thinking that that I'm basically a good person and worth helping out from time to time. And she has been friends with our guest for a long, long time. And so she and I were talking about the show, and she's been listening some this year. And she said, I know somebody who you really would love to talk to. And I think that you would enjoy hearing what he has to say. And I was like, okay, I'm all ears. And she told me about Steve. And I'm like, looking at his IMDb and listening to what she's saying, I'm like, how have we not talked to him before? This guy is a hero of mine, and I didn't even know it. So I'm absolutely thrilled that Steve's going to be on the show with us today.
Well, let's give just a little bit of background. And he's sitting in the green room, I'm sure, just all a gush and and blushing at this. But we are talking to a Hollywood writer and producer, someone who might be known for such small things as the Chris Rock Show, the Bonnie Hunt Show back, writing now for things like, for Jimmy Kimmel Live, The Man Show. We've got, a couple episodes of Seinfeld, The Simpsons, even Norm Macdonald Live. I mean, I can't.
The Late Show with David Letterman, Late Night with David Letterman, those small things, the Dana Carvey Show.
I don't know if anyone's heard of those, so we're going to have to get him on to explain all of that.
Well, my friend Jill had told me, she kind of gave me the rundown on all those. And then I looked at his IMDb and I was like, you buried the lead. He wrote for Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
Yeah.
Which I absolutely love that show. That is one of the funniest shows that has, in my mind, has ever been on. So I had told Steve that early on. And I am really excited to have Steve with us today. And Steve, I know, has a lot more to tell us, but Steve O'Donnell, who, as we have just said, has that great background, is going to join us on the show today.
Well, then let's go ahead and part the curtains. Audience, put your hands together. Let's go ahead and give a warm welcome to our guest, Steve O'Donnell. Welcome, buddy. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
We welcome you to our listeners' lounge. I hope you enjoyed the green room, the snacks, the beverages, and everyone took care of you okay back there.
Yes, I don't know where you got the tab because I know that's going off the shelves.
Yeah, well, we're in Atlanta, so we have that in with Coca-Cola.
Well, speaking of Coca-Cola, I was delighted that you like Space Ghost. That's a sort of Georgia product like yourself, isn't it? Did they do that in Atlanta?
Yes,
they did. Yeah, over at all the Turner properties at Cartoon Network, I believe.
Yeah,
had
right
that
there
show.
outside of the Georgia Tech campus area, and down at Georgia State in that area, right there off of I-75. You saw all the signs on the building where they produced a lot of those local late night kind of funny cartoons and more of adult oriented shows. Let's jump all the way to the beginning because I always like to start at that point. One of your very first earliest credits on IMDb is for the David Letterman show. So before we even get to Letterman, what was it in your high school years or in your youth that you felt you had the knack for comedy, or at least writing comedy? Where did that all start?
I don't know that I necessarily had the self-confidence to believe that I had a knack for comedy, but I had an inclination for it. I have friends like my friend Larry Jacobson, who worked on Letterman with me. When he was a child, he knew he wanted to be a comedy writer. He had a caricature of himself done at Knott's Berry Farm when he was like 8 that showed him reading a joke book saying, "I've got a million of them." I was not like that.
Wow.
I was like, I liked a bunch of things at once, but I definitely liked cartoons, and there were a couple of television experiences I had as a child that made a deeper impression on me than I could have imagined. You guys grew up in Atlanta neck of the woods and have lived in various other large markets. In Cleveland, Ohio, my hometown, which in its way is a sort of comedy, a rich comedy metropolis, the way that Newcastle is good for coal. There was a late night like horror movie host called Ghoulardi. And he would host late night movies on Fridays and Saturday nights, bad movies mostly, Son of the Mummy and the Monster That Devoured Cleveland kind of thing. And he would add funny comments while the movie was going along and sometimes insert himself into the activity. And that so tickled me that I felt like if I could do that for a living, that would be the greatest thing in the world. They would come back to him sometimes after during a break in the movie, and he would put a firecracker into a model hot rod and blow it up on camera. And I go, I can't believe this is on television. And this was like mid 1960s. He played sort of bebop music and rock and roll music. And I just thought this was the greatest guy in the world. Years later, I realized I did kind of get to do that on the Letterman show, do things that I just thought would be odd and strange, visually peculiar, and maybe just slightly hazardous. But
so this guy was sort of like pre MST3K, where they would, the Mystery Science Theater 3000, where they would
very
just riff
much
on
so.
a
Yeah,
movie.
I've talked with Joel Hodgson about it. Yes, there were other hosts like this. Chicago and New York had the kooky. They'd be sort of ghoulish. Sometimes they dress like vampires. Sometimes they dress like Frankenstein or something. Ghoulardi was kind of like a beatnik. He had like a Lenin beard and a fur cap and an eye patch, and he said he would say, "Turn blue, you purple kniff," because kniff was Fink backwards. And when you're 8, you think that's the funniest thing in the world. He had a sidekick named Tim Conway, who then went out to Hollywood and was in McHale's Navy and Carol Burnett's show and so on.
I've heard of him.
Yes, a highly beloved character. I would say if you loved Gene Wilder, you would probably enjoy Tim Conway too. I just think he was one of the greatest, sweetest, funniest people that ever was. And that rare example of someone who can be sort of largely sweet and still really hilarious, because I think there's a certain amount of truth in that. There's some anger and resentment and bile that goes with being funny, but not across the board necessarily always. And I do think Tim Conway had a devilish side in him as well. But anyway, he was a sidekick and a creative partner for Ernie Anderson, was the name of the broadcaster who played Ghoulardi. His son is a big director in Hollywood now, named Anderson, who did Boogie Nights and so on. Now the first names gone out of my head. There'll be a lot of that. First names going out of my head. Names going out of my head.
Oh, like
But
Wes Anderson?
no, not Wes
Not
Anderson. John something. It's like a 3-part name. Anyway, excellent director. Boogie Nights is the one that comes to my mind. But I loved that thing. I also loved Warner Brothers cartoons. And I was such a delector as a child of the Warner Brothers cartoons that I actually felt sorry for my playmates who preferred Hanna-Barbera cartoons. You know, like if you were watching Daffy Duck or Bugs Bunny and your friend said he liked Peter Potamus, you could only feel sadness, bordering on contempt, because it was just like, those are so terrible. What I did not enjoy when I was a kid was watching stand-up comics on television, because at that time, stand-up comics were all a little in the Henny Youngman kind of range. You'd see them on Ed Sullivan's show, or you see them on Hollywood Palace, and they were always making these like stale jokes about their mother-in-law and about double parking and stuff. And I just thought, my brothers and sisters are all funnier than these guys, and Bugs Bunny is way funnier than these guys. But then there were certain sort of exciting developments that changed my mind. I find that the exciting developments come along fairly rarely, at least for me in television. The first one that involved comedy and live people talking was Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. I thought it was the most exciting thing since Ghoulardi. They had all these catchphrases and stuff. I go back and watch clips online now, and it's a little mysterious to me. It seems to be moving more slowly. It seems to be a little more reliant on repetition than I had thought. And then I realized it was kind of a comedy religion in a way, where you have your little chants and your litanies, and you get them out. But
it was definitely unlike anything else that had been on to that point, right?
Yes, it was dizzying. And yet at the same time, it harkened back to older things. It stole with complete impunity from like old vaudeville acts. And what some of the lovely things it did was bring sort of a strange live comedy circuit talents in front of the camera, like Jackie Mom's Mabley or Pigmeat Markham. And all those phrases, here come the judge. And I say all those phrases as if your listeners possibly recognize that they're half a century old now. But they went back to like radio days and vaudeville days. So it's odd. Probably me talking about the Letterman show as we continue talking would be probably how I felt when I heard my parents talk about Fibber McGee and Molly, or about the Jack Benny program. Like, oh yeah, I guess you guys enjoyed listening to that decades ago. But
all that old stuff.
Yes. But in fact, I did like old stuff when I was a kid. I was captivated by the Little Rascals. Their experiences were not a world removed from my own. I grew up in a family of 12 brothers and sisters, of which 10 lived to adulthood. My twin brother and I, the 9th and 10th of that. This is like also a disappearing historical entity. The large Irish Catholic family, absurdly large. I know you guys have large families. Have I absorbed that right? You're sort of like Jim Gaffigan-like in that way.
I feel like it. I have 3 daughters. Alan has 4, and then Alan has like 19 dogs.
Oh, not quite. We actually were at 7 at one point. We're down to 4. So we were addicted to rescuing dogs, and then my wife finally said, "Okay, we got to slow down. The kids are all starting to move out and go to college, and we're still stuck dealing with all of them instead of spreading them all out." So, but yeah, no, we've got a brood. I grew up Catholic in Detroit. My mom was Catholic, so I mean, totally. You're talking to somebody here who gets the idea of the big family, especially if you're Irish Catholic.
Yes, well, you must discover now, even with 3 and 4, that seems larger than most people sort of allow. I'm sure Greta Thunberg would damn you for draining the world's resources. But all those dogs and kids, it does sound like a Little Rascals episode. Anyway,
well, it's funny because I grew up watching reruns of the Little Rascals. All the shows you mentioned, I remember either seeing on television when my mom and dad were watching TV and had full control over the TV, or would catch in some reruns themselves. So I grew up hearing and watching a lot of those same things you did. And of course, I was a cartoon kid. I think Walt was too. We couldn't get up to go to school Monday through Friday, but 6 a.m. when Warner Brothers starts the Looney Tunes hour, I'm up in front of the TV with a bowl of cereal.
Wow, you had Looney Tunes first thing in the morning, you luckies.
Yeah. It got to a point growing up, and I feel bad for the kids that don't have like those Saturday morning cartoons. I guess there's a cable channel now you can always go to, but for me, you had to wait till Saturday morning, and it started at 6 a.m. And by the time Soul Train or the America's Top 40 or anything that looked live action came on, I was like, okay, time to go outside and play.
Yes, though the very idea of waiting to watch something, that must seem so alien to anyone now. But especially with the 3 networks and the scheduling. And again, with all the brothers and sisters, there'd be a certain amount of, Man from U.N.C.L.E. is on opposite Bonanza. You're going to be fighting over who gets to watch it, because there's no way you can see it ever again after it's gone out into the ether,
Yeah, that was the big fight at our house, was Adam 12 or something my brother wanted to watch. And so I usually won and got to watch Adam 12. But I remember very well what it was like before we had 50 channels and streaming service.
Oh, there's more than 50.
Yeah, 500.
Right. Well, okay, so Steve, let's go ahead and circle back around and kind of center back to what was it? You had a knack for kind of wanting to be sarcastic and weigh in with a quip or a quote, but how did that lead you to decide on a career path that got you to Letterman? What was that interim step?
Well, Charles Schulz, I should say something else that I loved as a kid was the Peanuts comic strip. These are all standards, by the way. I know I'm not exactly expressing a fondness for some arcane or eccentric entity, but I love the Peanuts strip by Charles Schulz, Snoopy and Charlie Brown and all that. Charles Schulz had a quote he said he wanted to be a cartoonist because he thought it would be a good job for the Fairleys, because, you're fairly smart, you're fairly artistic, but you're not going to be like the novelist, the great American novelist, and you're not going to be Picasso or exactly. I sort of felt that way. I felt that the combination of qualities that I recognized increasingly in myself were going to be something in the pop culture, something about writing or I thought about being a teacher for a while, but that's sort of like the way a Catholic kid thinks about becoming a priest. It's so you can go into show business, you can make people listen to you. I did like to draw, and to crayon was the verb we used. And the visual element always struck me. I mean, before there was even Warner Brothers cartoons, there's a certain amount of looking around the house at crawling around toddler level and seeing faces in the electrical outlets and faces in the faucets and seeing personality in your toys and so on. I think there's some disposition towards seeing things that aren't there and making stories out of them. So besides jokes, which I wasn't necessarily a joke-loving person, but I liked funniness. I liked comic performance. I was crazy about Jonathan Winters, for example. I liked Get Smart. I continued to steal jokes from Buck Henry decades after that program was on. But so in school, I was doing journalism and cartooning and art and that kind of thing. It's a little confused by the fact that I was also a lifelong history buff. And these things have run concurrent in me. So I have sort of multiple odd interests that don't make me entirely just a joke writing machine. And maybe some of my employers would agree with that. But I liked the whole experience, the visual that went with the verbal. And I hope that has served me all right as you've gone along. It made a difference that I had a twin brother, because it was like having a partner, somebody to play off all the time. And my parents used to say we were easy to raise because they just put us off in the corner and they'd hear us chattering for hours at a time. Just kept ourselves busy. And then also having all the other brothers and sisters, because for a writer, it was like living 10 other lives, because you were very close to them, but they were each very different from you, like a different sign of the zodiac. And by the way, the 10 surviving brothers and sisters broke down: 5 brothers, 5 sisters, 5 left-handed, 5 right-handed, 5 blue-eyed, and 5 brown-eyed. And they were just like each a complete different story. Football players, baseball players, wrestlers. And then my sisters, also equally interesting. They went on to be everything from telephone operators to museum curators to magazine editors. No, it was a fine household, even though we didn't have that many books in the house. We had a lot of Dr. Seuss books, and we had 2 adult books. The Funk and Wagnall's Medical Advisor, which was cheaper than a doctor.
Right.
And the Bible. But since we were Roman Catholics, we never read that.
No, that's usually that you prop the one short table leg up with that, and that's where it goes.
Yeah, it's like, don't put your Pepsi on the Bible.
We have coasters for that.
See, we were Presbyterian. It came out when we needed a good scolding.
Oh, yes.
Could you just spank us, Dad, and let us go back out and play?
Right. Yeah, I was going to say, it made my parents experts in the Bible because it was constant. But
I did admire Protestants for several reasons when I was a kid. One was they had a lot of good hymns. A lot of the good gospel things and stuff were Protestant. But the other was they could summon things. They'd quote something from Samuel or from Revelations or something. You go like, how do you know that? There's so many chapters. Again, as Catholics, you kind of know the stories and the sins and a lot of the heartache. And again, the visuals, all the bleeding hearts and the thorns pressed into skulls and that kind of thing.
Oh, we were very good at guilt. I mean, that was it. Also, it doesn't matter. You don't have to memorize anything. As long as you feel bad about everything you're thinking, that's all that matters.
Yeah, that is certainly how many comics recall the Catholic upbringing. I found it a weird mixture of stuff, a hodgepodge of sweetness and tenderness, and Jesus holding hands with the youngsters. And then, of course, nails going into feet and hands and stuff. That sort of creeped you out a little bit. But
yeah, just a hair.
Even as a kid, I could not add it up. It was like, okay, so poverty is good, and it's good to be poor, and God likes poor people. But it's when we get to heaven, we all get a golden mansion and a crown of diamonds. And I go like, well,
yeah, that does seem to run contrary.
Which is it?
right.
And the altar has golden candlesticks and stuff. But I didn't mind that. I sort of liked all the panoply and pomp and visuals. I loved holy cards, and I loved organ music and choir music when they'd be doing Gregorian chants and stuff. It helped that I didn't understand it. It's like there's a lot of movies that are better if you see them in a foreign language, because it really helps if you don't know what they're saying. I think
watched a few of those.
For mumbo jumbo purposes, religion as an aesthetic experience is helped by being overawed through ignorance. But also, I associate it with my playmates and my sisters and brothers and everything else. So it's like, and we somehow, I guess I was fortunate in a million other ways. We had good priests and nuns, some of them quite funny. Some of the nuns that were repressed stand-ups telling jokes about Moses up on Mount Sinai and the children of Israel, all like, what happened to him? Did he go over to Joe's Bar and Grill or something? And of course, again, when you're a kid, you think, I can't believe the nun is making a joke.
No, yeah.
But many of them were quite funny.
Go ahead.
Yes, we're stalled in the Catholic faith. Sorry about that.
Nothing wrong with that, right? For all of our Catholic friends. Now, your first credit I see on IMDb was just a sort of an anniversary special for Letterman early in his career. So what got you at least in that episode, and then how did you slowly work your way into becoming more consistent?
Well, the first network TV job I had was with Late Night with David Letterman, but my progress forward did not seem to make as much sense as it does when I look backwards on it. Before I worked at Letterman, I worked at the Museum of Broadcasting and then at the NBC videotape library in 30 Rock. So I was kind of doing things that were pushing me towards writing and working in television without quite knowing it. And when I'd gotten out of college, after teaching history for a little while and moving furniture for Atlas Van Lines, I got a job writing greeting cards, and I did that for almost 2 years before I moved from Cleveland to New York, where I got the museum job. And these were, again, pop cultural things. I thought I would get a job in advertising or working on a magazine. And I had interviews at like Esquire and People and places like that. But I was so glad that I got the really low paying museum job instead, because I really, really loved it. And because it combined pop culture with history, the two things I liked the best. And all that time I was freelance writing. Again, starting in high school, I did journalism and cartooning. Through college, my brother and I got scholarships to Harvard, where they have the Lampoon, the undergraduate magazine, which is a great training ground. And it certainly was helpful later. Yes, it was a network, and it was very, very helpful. But remember, scholarship, 10 brothers and sisters. That kind of offsets the tuxedos and the privilege. The Letterman thing was, I was working in the tape library when Letterman had a morning show. Again, this all seems like ancient history, but he had a daytime show for a couple of months in 1980. And when I saw it, I said, I got to work for that guy. I've got to do that. Now, my life had not been marked by focused, intense ambition like I was Napoleon Bonaparte. And your high school guidance counselors, they tell you, find that thing you love and go after it. I never found it was that clear. Most of my decisions, I was based on 75%, 80%, 65%. Like, it feels about all right. I'll give it a try. But when I saw the Letterman daytime show, I said, I'm going to work for that guy, and they'd be crazy if they don't hire me. And a year or so later, I heard they were getting a late night show together. And I put together a submission and got it to the original head writer, this fantastically talented and artistic and hilarious woman named Meryl Marco, who's still writing. She just had a new book come out a couple of weeks ago. Got the submission to her. And I was still, it was odd. They did hire me, and I was delighted. I had to give 2 weeks notice at my old job, because it was that kind of job. You couldn't just walk out. But it was, I couldn't have been happier. I have to say, when I think of the happy moments in my life, getting that job made me very happy, very frightened too, because it's like, okay, I did the submission. Now I've got to do this every day. But the meeting, when they liked the submission, I got a call they left a message at the tape library where I worked that said, can you come over for an interview? And I just ran over there because I was in the building already. And when Meryl Marco saw me, she said, how did you get here so fast? I said, well, I work just about 10 floors downstairs. So that was something to talk about. And then she calls in, she goes, Don, this was one of her code names for Letterman. And Letterman came in with a baseball hat and glasses on, which at that time I was not familiar with. Oh, that's Letterman with his off-camera persona. And he said, how did you get here so fast? And I said, I saw the message and decided to eschew the phone call and just come right over. And of course, Letterman said, do you hear that, Meryl? Eschew. We've got a real writer here. We're going to get our money's worth. Yes, he loved teasing me over the years for stupid things, I would say, and I guess I deserved them, and that was something we could share. I had worked at the greeting card company and told them I was going to quit and go to New York to seek my fortune, and one of the vice presidents there had taken me aside and said, if you stay here, I promise you, on the way you're going, you could be the next Bob Hammerquist. And of course, I had no idea who that was, but he was the great greeting card writer of the time. But I told that story to Letterman a couple of weeks in to the job. And for a decade afterwards, whenever he was mad at me or disappointed for some reason, he would go, well, you're no Hammerquist. Affectionately, fondly. But I was so excited about that. I never asked about salary or anything like that. It was just all like, it might as well be, I'd pay them, I really would have.
It's the right job.
Done it for more than
a dream.
A week or two, but but it was like, you might as well have told me you will live in a castle made out of ice cream and fly around on a swan, But I did come to understand the nuts and bolts of it. And it was certainly great to be working with Meryl. And then the other writers, I thought they were the most fantastic group. I've been lucky to be with all these different groups of men and women over the years, but you hold something sort of special about that first job when you're in your 20s or early 30s. And Chris Elliott was there, who I just thought, like, more than anyone, represented the writer performer, because he would write all his own material and then do these crazy bits. And now, of course, he's on Schitt's Creek and has been in some of the best movies ever made, Groundhog's Day.
Yeah.
The other writers,
something about Mary.
Yeah. Well, I thought he absolutely made Schitt's Creek. When his first 2 minutes on that show, I was hooked because of him.
Yes, he has a very controlled, deranged quality.
He does.
He just seems like he can be very precise and prim, but he can also be completely out of his gourd, or how he'd use some term like out of his tree.
Right. And you don't know whether he's going to bury you in the backyard or be your best friend. Like, he's totally unpredictable.
Yes, the possible psychopathology is always latent. But in fact, of course, he's an amazingly sweet guy who is a great family man. He has 2 really funny daughters. Abby was on Saturday Night Live for 2 seasons. And Bridie makes a lot of funny documentary films and has won awards for acting. They're just a lovely, lovely, funny family. And 3 generations, like, while we're going back to Laugh-In and Vaudeville and Fibber, McGee, and Molly, Chris's father had been the Elliot of Bob and Ray, Bob Elliott and Ray Goulding. So that's 3 generations of comedy there. I don't know. I don't know who else could even compare to that, because it's 3 pretty good generations of comedy.
Yeah.
I guess you have Stiller and Mira producing the Ben Stiller and so on. But, and I guess there's a lot of comedy offsprings now. But anyway, that staff, Andy Breckman and George Meyer, these guys went on to work on so many great shows. But almost everyone on that staff, except for Tom Gamble and Max Pross, it was their first job. It was their first TV job. And that really made a difference. And I think that was to the credit of Merrill, Marco, and Letterman, because they wanted people that were trying to please themselves and do something different, that didn't know the rules, so to speak, that weren't trying to follow a conventional plan in a way. And again, I give Meryl credit here, because she really wanted to see strange things on television. How strange these things look now in retrospect, 45 years later or whatever, I don't know. But at the time, a lot of them became staples, the cutting away to cameraman and the cutting away to the producer and the non sequiturs and the light zany surrealism and so on. But we had much fun doing it. And I was there a long time, 12 years. Yeah. And that has characterized my career. I was at Kimmel for a decade or so. It's just I've had a couple of long-term jobs and then dozens and dozens of short-term jobs, which I guess is sort of how it works when you're a kind of independent contractor, freelance writer, whatever. As long as I was at Letterman, I was there more than a decade, and I had a photo ID, but it identified me as temporary employee. And
that 1 decade, that's all. It expires after a decade.
Reminding you you're only as good as your last bit.
Well, I think that was always on one's mind. I certainly the unit managers and the payroll people and the network liaison, they all seem to resent the show. They was all like, they wish they could just have the network and not put on shows. Like, could they just get together every day in 30 Rock and go to the commissary for lunch and send each other memos and that kind of thing? The putting on of shows actually seemed like a nuisance to them, especially the Letterman show where we were doing borderline vandalistic bits on the street where people.
Well, I was going to say, Steve, that I was a big fan of Carson growing
Yes.
up. And then when Letterman came on, I probably early in the first season, maybe I started watching, and I was like, I love this, because you had everything, and I don't know where all these came along, but the Velcro suit bit, the Alka-Seltzer suit, the throwing watermelons off of buildings, all those crazy things that y'all did.
Yes.
I loved them. And
Good.
Every night when it came on, I was like, okay, what is it tonight? And
Yes.
it was exciting to me.
Oh, well, it was how great. Yes, we sort of felt that way, even though we didn't always know what we were going to do at the 9 o'clock in the morning for that taping that afternoon. A lot of it is Letterman's credit. He came up with bits all the time, including the throwing stuff off the tower. The Velcro suit was Joe Toplin, Sandy Frank. Again, Meryl came up with so many pieces. She was absolutely the backbone of the whole thing, even though it was all very frenetic and made us all a little. I've combined because eventually I became head writer, and that job was like, it was a combination of being the editor of a small town newspaper and someone who has to mount a parade every day, because you had to put out a certain amount of copy, you had to write a certain number of pages, but you also had to come up with something to look at, whether it was some sort of sights to see. Sometimes the site was writing, like the top 10 list, where you would just see words on the screen. But there were other things too, like the 5-story tower, where we would sometimes be struck with awe and wonder at what would happen to the fluorescent tubes and the guacamole and so on after they hit the pavement.
I was going to ask you, so when you would sit down to put together a show, I mean, you had people who were lining up guests, I guess, and then
the talent department.
Okay. And so how much of that was you going over and saying, okay, who do we have tonight? Who do we have tomorrow? What do I need to, what questions does Dave need to ask them? How much of that is already kind of in place and you just have to flesh out? And how much of that is you've got to dig and be creative and write something fresh and new?
Thank God we didn't have to write something fresh and new. No, I think it's a mixture of those things, because to some extent, the talent department, the human interest department, would operate separately from the writers. But I think it was much more fluid and cross-pollinating creative with the Letterman show. And I think other shows may be increasingly like that. We'd see some guest would be coming up in 2 days and would have some idea for Charlton Heston, or we'd have some bit that John Candy could do, or something like, well, if we've got Rita Rudner, let's have her do this, so the writers would work with the talent bookers, and to some extent vice versa. So there was a little, they weren't ironclad segregated departments. But we didn't, and sometimes we'd have ideas for funny questions to ask the guests. But ordinarily, the talent department would be writing their own questions and stuff like that. There would be wonderful nights, again, giddy nights. I remember in one evening being introduced to Liberace and shaking his hand, and then 10 minutes later meeting Bob Dylan. Like, wow, this is the best night ever. And then there were things that were just stupid things. The first year or two, there were no good, great, big name, fabulous stars. They were like Alba Ballard, the lady who dressed her pet parrots up in little doll costumes. Right. Like, how many segments can we get out of this? Or we'd have some beatnik poet like Brother Theodore or something. But little by little, names started appearing on the show. I remember it was a big deal when Cher came on. We were all very excited. But to some extent, that wasn't really what we were shooting for. Like, it was a Carson production, and there were definite differences between the Johnny Carson Tonight Show and Letterman. And I was all in favor. I was glad about there were certain restrictions the Carson company put on us. Like, we couldn't call the monologue a monologue. So we called it opening remarks, so that there couldn't really be a comparison between Carson's monologue and Dave's opening remarks. His opening remarks were much briefer, for one thing. The other thing was we couldn't have a big band like Doc Severinsen, which suited us completely. We wanted a tight little, garage band combo like Paul Schaefer had there with Will Lee and Anton Fig and so on. So the things they foisted on us, so to speak, turned out to be blessings and really good.
The talent there with Paul Schaefer and Anton Fig, and then of course you'd have like Eddie Van Halen come sit in, and I mean the band night to night was just amazing.
By the way, Eddie Van Halen, rest in peace. I have a happy memory from when we did a show in Los Angeles, and I'm running down the back staircase to get down to the stage, and I have to very gingerly step over Eddie Van Halen and who was his lovely wife's name, the actress?
Valerie Bertinelli.
Yes, Valerie Bertinelli. They were making out like teenagers on this staircase, and I had to like just, pardon me, so sorry, pardon me, excuse me, so sorry, pardon me.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I was delighted. I couldn't have been happier. That was the kind of thing that you go, I can't believe I'm talking to Martin Mull about doing a bit. It was a dream come true in a lot of ways. But you talked about how you were attracted to Letterman right out of the gate. I liked about him something that I didn't see elsewhere, which was a sort of skepticism, a kind of restlessness. I liked that he was a little uneasy on camera, not nervous, but just like, I'm not buying this whole premise. The idea of a slick talking voice telling you and talking through the screen. He knew it was all a little suspect and it was all a little bit of a sham. And I loved that. That appealed to me, and it remains something that I like about him. He had a profile in the Sunday Times last weekend, and I think much of that character was still there. He's mellowed a good deal in a fascinating way, but it was his at its darkest, I guess it would be sardonic, but at its finest, it was a sort of Mark Twain level skepticism.
Mm-hmm. I think that approach to the guests that he had was always interesting because Johnny Carson was Johnny Carson. He was friendly. He was like talking to your brother, right? But Dave would come in and you didn't always know what he was going to ask. Sometimes he would ask a real biting question.
Yes, I remember being at a bar or a party or meeting somebody on the street, and they go, "Oh, Dave, he's so mean to the guests." And I go, "Really?" I don't remember being mean to the guests, but I remember him asking kind of blunt and direct questions, kind of, and also just not just playing by the public relations rule book. I would say as years went by, he got a little less take no prisoners, kind of. He got a little more polite. I think there was a certain amount of him thinking that, these Hollywood personalities are now my peers to some extent.
Right.
And that in some way, this is speaking only for myself, because I think for many people the show just grew more and more and more successful. But I just found the bigger it got, the more it lost what was interesting about it to me in the first place. I'm sure Letterman grew impatient with me because he'd go like, I don't want to be a late night college cult. He would want to have as broad and big an audience as he could get. And I'd be going, really? I would rather be a late night college cult.
Yeah, right.
My name isn't on the show, so it was a lot easier for me to say. And I already enjoyed the anonymity of being a writer behind the scenes. So that was But anyway, the move over to the Ed Sullivan Theater, as fantastic and historic as that was, in the early years, Dave used to call the show like, "Oh, we've got a fabulous extravaganza for you," and then of course it would be really rinky-dink. But later down the line, when you've got Paul McCartney playing on the marquee, and you've got the World Series champions coming on to hit fungos into the audience, you're going, what kind of is an extravaganza? It's an actual good show. So for some reason, I liked it when it wasn't so good a show.
I liked all that crazy stuff. Even though, I like Dave all the way through to the end. And I even like his show that he has on Netflix now. I think Dave is a very good interviewer. So I've always enjoyed enjoyed that.
Well, it helps that he's intelligent to start with, and that he has a wide range of material and resources behind him to back him up. The fact that he came from a sort of lower middle class background in Indiana, I think it just gave him a lot more to deal with. I loved in the first weeks of writing for him how he would just throw in specific details about the Sears Die Hard battery and the extra crispy batter dip this or that. He was just like he had the lexicon and the phrases from pop culture always ready at the tip of his tongue, but not for cliche purposes, but for sort of warped comic juxtaposition. Just certain words he loved. Unguent and lotion and ointment and things like that. Names like Linda and Kenny. You can't even explain why they were funny. He liked words like ham and fudge.
Right. Yeah, and he would hook on to something and play with it throughout the night.
Yes. Well, that he was the master of. And sometimes he could even engineer it. How he would go out and talk to the audience beforehand, before the cameras started rolling. And I've worked on other shows where hosts disagree, where they think, oh no, you got to wait until the cameras are rolling to make your entrance. You can't take some of the excitement out of by showing yourself to the audience before the show. Letterman did not agree with that, and he was right about it, because he would chat with the audience, and there'd be some moment in a conversation where he could latch onto a phrase or a word, like somebody was from Mahwah, New Jersey or something. And so then early in the show, he would make a reference to well, that's like what someone from Mahwah would say. And of course, the crowd would go crazy. The people at home weren't quite sure what it was, but they knew it was something kind of funny. And they got the pointed, specific, application of it.
Well, and I'll tell you what it did with me is it drew me in because I wanted to know what the joke was.
Yes. I was that, by the way, I mentioned laughing. Then about once a generation, something else interesting happens. When National Lampoon came out, that magazine, I just thought, oh my God, they're really doing it well. And it had a kind of, technical excellence for one thing. The artwork was fantastic. And it was pertinent that way to Letterman, that I thought that he was one of those exciting new developments, that weren't completely without precedent, but seemed like they're sui generis. I don't think I've ever said that out loud.
Well, and you mentioned that as you were kind of coming into the industry, that two of the things that you really loved were pop culture and history. And you had two other shows that you worked on a little bit that I wanted to just get you to touch on, if you don't mind. You wrote a couple episodes of Seinfeld, and you wrote a couple of episodes of The Simpsons. And of course, both of those cultural icons, but they're shows that also deal with cultural icons. So how did you end up writing for those shows?
Well, I should immediately convey that I was not a pillar of either of those organizations. I was more of a shingle. But I will say this about Seinfeld. My love of history was actually one of the things that was an icebreaker there, because Larry David is a big history buff. And on my first day of working there, I gave him I brought little ice-breaking gifts. I brought a set of 4 top 10 books for Jerry, and for Larry, who I had never met before, I gave him this authenticated square foot fragment of Hitler's car. The fragment was only a square inch, but it was mounted on like a square foot of Yale graduate degree certificate of authentication. That I got it in Las Vegas, and I thought, if you think it's funny, and he did. And we were both reading the David McCullough biography of Truman. He saw it as I unloaded stuff onto my desk. He was, "Oh, you're reading the Truman book." He had read it already, of course. And he had said, "Oh yeah, Truman, they hated Truman because he just told it like it was. He didn't care whose feelings he hurt." And I said, "Yes, not like that nice Cordell Hull." And Larry David just howled with delight. He said, "O'Donnell made a Cordell Hull joke. Cordell Hull." Who was like a really obscure diplomat from the same era as Truman. but I took a gamble that Larry would be that into it, and he was. They were, again, there too. It was so fortunate to be around these people like Carol Leifer and stuff, who was just funny all the time. You have been doing what you're doing long enough to know that there's plenty of officially, professionally funny people who are not funny all the time, and you don't really require it, but it is such a treat when there really are such people. I think of a handful. Carol Leifer is one of them. There's a writer named Andy Breckman that's like, it's almost like you can't talk with her for too long. It's just you're worn out from the constant funniness. But that Seinfeld staff was just spectacular, and I was a very slight addition. I wrote 2 episodes. I did discover, and you've heard this a million times, that they liked stories based on your own experience. And
Right.
And the first couple stories that I got into the pipeline were from my own experience. There was a Chinese restaurant that I liked very much that would not deliver to the south side of 86th Street, but they would deliver to the north side of 86th Street. And I did try to figure out ways to like meet them on the corner or give them a pet. But anyway, it became a premise for an episode where Elaine has to set up a false address across the street from her own just so she can get the Chinese food delivered to the. And
And she's living in the janitor's closet just so she can get the food.
That's right. That's right. But to me, the delight was that it was actually based on something real. And one of my happiest moments on Letterman, even though it came off just fair, but it was based on something my mom had said to me. I was home like at Christmas time in Cleveland, and she had noticed talk about Letterman maturing and getting mellower and being more grown up with the guests. He used to wear sneakers with the suit, with the jacket and tie.
Right.
And my mom had noticed that he was wearing leather shoes now. And she said, I noticed he doesn't wear the wrestling shoes anymore. He's got the leather shoes on. Did his supervisor talk to him? and my mom, she was not kidding at all. This was like, my dad was a welder, worked the same job for 40 years. I've got his lunchbox in my kitchen. But I just thought that's so funny, Letterman's supervisor. So I said, I'm going to write a character who's Letterman's supervisor. And we got Charlton Heston played the part, but the idea was Letterman's throwing a pencil through the window, and then the supervisor comes out and goes, "Why are you wasting good pencils?" Like
the fact you got Charlton Heston to do that, though, that's
great.
That's great.
And unbilled, uncredited, except till the very end. No, he was fantastic. He was like a real actor. He understood the wardrobe.
Almost, yeah.
We should try him with some bigger things.
Great thing.
Somebody like Cecil B. DeMille on the phone. We've got a guy he might like.
Well, in some of the very earliest of Letterman shows, the use of celebrities in odd places gave me such a weird thrill. Like they would tilt the camera up just to show that Joey Bishop was sitting up amid the overhead lights. The comic Joey Bishop.
Yeah, I remember that.
He didn't say anything. He was just there.
Yeah, just like on the rafter.
It would not be referred to again. And also there'd be the little arch, like funny man, Joey Bishop, there as his introduction. It's hard to explain why that was so bewitching, but I was crazy about it.
Well, and the other one was Larry Bud Melman.
Yes.
When he showed up, I was like, what is this guy all about?
Well, that was a wonderful natural discovery. That was 2 of the writers. Again, such a privilege to work with so many great people that were each so distinct. But there was this team of writers, Carl Tiedemann and Steve Weiner, who were fresh out of NYU. And part of their submission to Letterman and to Merrill Marco was this short film they had made that starred Melman. And they had found Melman, whose name was Calvert DeForest, the actor. They just had an open audition for this. It was a fake documentary about the world's worst, cheapest movie making company, like sub Ed Wood, sub Roger Corman, But when they saw this guy audition, they said, hey, we've got something, because there wasn't anything technically wrong with him. He was just like a big protected baby. I believe he was Calvert DeForest lived in the house he grew up in Brooklyn. He worked and continued to work for the first 3 years of the show as a receptionist in a methadone clinic in Brooklyn. And then when they discovered he was making enough money from his 2 or 3 times a week appearances on Letterman, they had to let him go. But that just means we hired him full time. But a very odd guy, but a very sweet guy, a peculiar guy. But I think he had the greatest time of his life between 60 and 70 when he was on the show.
Well, and I'm so happy to hear that he was an odd guy, because
he wasn't an actor. He was naturally weird. It was like he didn't know how to push a thumbtack into corkboard. I remember having to show him how to do that. He didn't like getting up on a stool, like a step stool, that made him frightened and dizzy. He was sort of like just an odd, wild child in a way. He was actually descended from some great families of actors: Calverts, DeForests, Barrymores, Drews. Those acting families. I think that's why he at least nominally tried to become an actor. It turned out that he had something to offer that turned out to be something that wasn't exactly acting skill. It was like the gift of his own natural personality. But yes, he was quite a wonder. Yeah, and they've tried to. Kimmel, who was such a huge Letterman fan, we used to talk about the specifics on Letterman all the time, and there were certain things he would try to recapitulate or capture the essence again, like he wanted to have. So he got out of his security guards something like a Melman type character, his kooky Uncle Frank, and so on, and the way Guillermo, the security guard, works that way still now on Kimmel. But that used to be a delight to spend time. I'm sure the only reason Kimmel hired me was so I could tell him Letterman stories. He was such a Letterman devotee. But there was a sort of natural generational segue between those two. That
makes for a good kind of a transition point here in the reminiscence and where your career was. What was it like to see up and coming comedians working on like Jimmy Kimmel Live, The Man Show, and then see him eventually take over the reins of the late night show?
It was very interesting, especially as he would start to have interactions with Letterman, because I first met Kimmel, that is Jimmy Kimmel, working on The Man Show, which was a very odd kind of project. Again, I've mentioned the 5 brothers and the 5 sisters. Brothers all loved The Man Show. Sisters all hated The Man Show.
I guess that's
why.
Like,
yeah, I guess that's like the Three Stooges. I always thought the joke was on men about.
It was always on men. Yes,
of course. But I discovered that Kimmel had a deep religious attachment to the Letterman Show, starting from when he was an adolescent. That he would see these blue and gold, varsity jackets that only the staffers wore, and they would sometimes appear in the bumpers, or you could see them standing at the edge of the camera field. And he had his mom make him one, like a sort of a simulation you might be able to get together in the POW camp, for the Christmas musicale. And it was so impressive that he was a total devotee. By the time he started having some success with his late night show, he'd go on Letterman. And I remember the first appearance or two, I could tell Dave wasn't necessarily crazy about him, or there was a sort of reticence. It was like the old dog who has the frolicking, slobbering puppy running around him. Kimmel being the slobbering puppy at this point. But I think over the decade of the early 21st century, they came to enjoy and respect each other. They certainly knew what the challenge was, what they were up against. It was funny, when I came to work on The Man Show, Kimmel reminded me that we had met before, but it was when he was a teenager. We were doing a week of shows in Las Vegas, the Letterman Show was, and there was this kid who used to come up to the stage at the end of every show and just said, "Great show, great show." He would hang around the lobby of the hotel where we were staying, and he befriended some of the writers, including me. And then he was treated badly by some of the other writers who told him to stop bothering them or whatever. I was so delighted that I was nice to him, because decades later he said, "You were very nice to me, but so-and-so was not, and I have not forgotten that."
Guess who's going to come work for me?
Yeah.
Yes. So he had me come work for him, and I couldn't have been happier.
That's awesome. That actually, according to your background and credits, you worked, I think, the longest, or at least the most number of episodes on Jimmy Kimmel Live.
It's been a long time since I was there. I left in 2008, maybe 2009. I really have no idea. By the way, those things are not exactly accurate. I don't know why they'll say, like, Letterman worked on 218 episodes, and I'll go, no, I worked on at least 2,000 episodes.
Right.
But it's whatever gets into the computer, whatever. I've never. Again, how all that stuff shows up there, Wikipedia and IMDb, I have no idea.
Well, let me
I
ask
am
this
sometimes
then.
impressed when I see, like, they've even got, things that I did very briefly. Dana Carvey show and certain award shows and stuff like that, the Oscars. I go, who? I suppose it's through SAG-AFTRA or Writers Guild. I have no idea.
Well, I think people that are signed up to IMDb can actually submit things as well, and then it's supposed to get fact checked. So, the reason I wanted to ask about the Jimmy Kimmel Live is it felt like the two big chunks of your career were spent either with Letterman or with Jimmy Kimmel.
Oh, they were big chunks, all right. I know what my writers' room friends would say about that. It's like heaving big chunks, big steaming piles.
Yeah, parts of my career have been like that too, Steve. I
do think there was something about that work that suited me. I have a short attention span. Indeed, it was culture shock going from Letterman to Seinfeld, for example, because I never had to write any little storyline or dialogue or characters that lasted more than 90 seconds or 2 minutes on Letterman. I might write a flashback for a viewer mail fantasy or something like that. But then you start working on half hours, and you have to come up with plot lines where characters interact and affect each other and change the course of the story. And so that was very dizzying. But I did like this sort of potpourri, constantly changing, fresh slate every day of both Letterman and Kimmel. Plus the additional, I'll just go ahead and say, crutch, but also tool of being able to repeat things or have running segments or repeating jokes or echoing jokes, being careful always not to over rely on them. I remember some writers at Letterman rolling their eyes if we brought the giant doorknob out too many times, or if we turned on the confetti cannon too many times. It's like, you're just relying on a cheap trick. And I went like, if the cheap trick works.
Right.
No, it's a constant challenge. You want to do new, fresh things in a fresh format, but it's very hard to not at least organize each show into Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and they would have a certain amount of consistency. Even when I was a kid and I would leaf through Mad Magazine, or for that matter, Reader's Digest, I could see that they had a format. I knew that there would be these certain features that would appear, and they would appear spaced out within the magazine, even though the copy and the angle for the features would be different from month to month. There was some kind of framework to hang the stuff on. And that's what you sort of deal with the show. Every once in a while, there'd be something like, we're going to do a full comedy piece in the last act. We never do that. But never say never, I guess, is another rule one might make. It's all of this seems odd too, because now the whole idea of a network show that had to exist within an hour-long taping if you were doing it live, or go to an edit room to make it whatever the actual finished length is, 44 minutes or whatever. Well, you guys do a podcast, right? So what's the longest and the shortest? You probably like somewhere in the hour, 90 minutes. Well, how long is an average show?
Our average show would be about 90 minutes to about an hour and 45. We had a couple of shows hit the 2-hour mark.
All right. Well, that's probably a lot. I only say because I've worked on a couple of podcasts with Norm Macdonald, and he was quite liberal about, like, if we only got 40 minutes worth of talk, then it's 40 minutes. But there'd be others where he'd be with like Bill Hader or Seinfeld or Letterman or something, where he would want it to go longer.
Oh yeah.
And that's the beauty of it, and that you don't have to be you don't have to fight with your sister about watching Hawaiian Eye versus 77 Sunset Strip or whatever it is.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned those two episodes of the podcast, because those are the two episodes of the Norm Macdonald podcast I've listened to.
In a way, they're fine. They're fine, but they are like, it would be like judging your childhood memory from like a Thanksgiving dinner or from the day you all put on your best blazer and went to mass on Easter. You know, like a regular podcast would be, you know, would be more like somebody more down to earth kind of thing, you know, some comic that Norm had worked with a million times before, because it would be, they were such important things when it was Letterman and Seinfeld. But yeah, I love the freeness of the podcast, the format.
Yeah.
Also, it did bring back some of the more desperate afternoons of the Letterman show, because sometimes we wouldn't know what we were doing until 15 minutes before the podcast. And I'd go, well, what if we try to do this thing where you're doing a USO show, but the USO show is for a bunch of drones, and then we'll add the drones in the audience later. We can do that a week from now, you know. And the seat of the pants part of it it's both terrible, but it can be wonderful too.
Yeah.
But anyway, and then there were the similar experiences with Bonnie Hunt, and there too was a whole other thing where that was like a largely female staff and a largely female writing crew and so on, and I loved that. I worked on again, sometimes I'll go, oh, my credits include Talk to Me with Kira Sedgwick and the Kristen Chenoweth show. And people go, what? Well, I've never even heard of those, just because they've faded into the mist of times. But you sort of start with then you can build up to the. But I was often the only guy at the table, and this is a topic one has heard discussed much in the last generation about you know, the token woman at the comedy table. And I think we're seeing that change, and it's especially in the last half decade. It's been pretty great. But I do remember excitement at being really impressed, first of all, with Bonnie Hunt, but also with Holly Wortell. There were these also the performers. I guess I always have a little bit of a crush on, male or female, the writer who can also perform. That is sort of like a great thing. It's like a double whammy, mm-hmm. a great rich gift to have. I mean, I've been on camera 1,000 times, but always in some dull functional role, you know. Like I said, I did play a cop so many times, Letterman, that they actually gave me my own policeman's uniform with my name on the pocket permanently, you know. And a lot of, you know, doctors and lawyers and boring things like that. I think it's because I have dark frame glasses. But
oh yeah, it gives you that distinguished.
Yeah. Glasses equals smart. You know, instant communication. That's how you get things across.
Right. That's why I ditched my contact lenses and went back to glasses. I at least want to look smart. So
yes. Anyway, if I could make any summary comment about the agreeable aspects of my working life, it has been these other people that you want to be around, people that are like way better than you and are way funnier than you and are just way more inspired than you, because it's just such a kick, you know. It's so you just go, oh, and it also, it's sort of a standard for yourself, like, oh, would Jim Downey do that? I don't think so I'm not going to do it. Yeah, to have some idols, to have some people you look up to, and also, it's just entertaining. You must have as more fun doing your show than the dreary, awful parts of it. There are dreary, awful parts, and the technical parts, and also just the occasional when something falls through, or where there's a sudden change of heart about something, that then you're scrambling, and that can be very stressful.
Oh yeah, no, Walt doesn't have to worry about any of that. He dumps it all on me. So
I am that stress.
Walt is a large part of my pain, but so is the other stuff you just mentioned. No. Hey, before we kind of get you kind of caught up to where you are today, along the way, and I know it's part of being with writing teams, so that it's shared with the other folks, but if the information I have is correct, you are the winner of 4 different primetime Emmys and have at least 17 total nominations, other nominations. That is amazing for your body of work.
Yeah, that's my twin brother used to tease me. You're a 17-time loser. I don't know. Who knows what those things mean? It just means that you were lucky enough to be associated with people that were good and that were popular, and the shows made a mark of some kind. I have it somewhere. I keep meaning to put this up somewhere. Like around 1999, I got a Black Image Award because I'd worked on the Chris Rock show, and I was represented by an agency, ICM, and they took a full-page ad out in Variety that said ICM wishes to congratulate their clients on winning, the NAACP, Black Image Award, and it was like Jay-Z, Lil Kim, Steve O'Donnell. Like, wow, there I am. Of course, which doesn't belong, kind of. But there is something.
But that's fantastic that you could accomplish that, and that
yes,
that they thought enough of your work to recognize you.
Yes, well, some of that was just coincidental. I was part of a staff of Black and white writers, but that was fun too. That's also, again, part of the blessing. You get to have experiences that on the Chris Rock show, I early on made a decision. I am not going to try to be Black. I'm not going to try to do elaborate handshakes. In fact, when I would see like Ali Leroy or Lance Crowther coming down the office hallway, I'd go, "Hey, Lance, give me 5," in an orderly fashion. And then we'd shake hands like regular.
Oh, that is funny.
Like regular businessmen. And they'd go, "You're so white."
Yes.
No, it was just, again, like working on the Daily Show with Bonnie Hunt, who was like so much like Letterman in many ways, but then also the added fantasticness of being, having a female perspective and from a big family herself, 7 brothers and sisters from Chicago. There was some simpatico there. The way there's always, if you can find some simpatico with the host, it's good. And I was pretty fortunate in most of my jobs to be able to do that. Did I mention I've climbed Mount Everest 5 times? Oh, wait.
No, you didn't. We should have had you on a couple weeks back.
I should have said 4 times, but damn it, how could I possibly
or 6
compare to that?
One up Ryan.
Your dashing guest from a week or so back.
That was an amazing interview. I felt like I was like it didn't feel real. Like somebody I'm talking to has done things I will likely never do once, let alone repeat multiple times.
Yes, a very dramatic demonstration of the true thing that everyone inhabits a different reality.
Yeah,
even if you're doing very similar things. And wasn't there some high school connection there too? The high school turns out to be more important, a common ground than for many a podcast and talk show. Or am I misremembering? Wasn't the
No? He is a little bit younger than me. He was in my sister's class. She's about 6 or 7 years behind me. We also have several actors and actresses. Our high school is interestingly a pretty well accomplished high school. A couple NFL alumni, and so it is. It's a really interesting school to have gone to.
Yes, well-rounded, it sounds like.
Very well-rounded. Very well-rounded. Couple musicians, and then me. So.
Well, I think that's wonderful. I will offer a strange personal detail that is borderline creepy. But when I was in like couples counseling once with a lady partner, she pointed out to the counselor, he has friends from high school. And
like
it was supposed
negative?
to be like, it was supposed to be there's something wrong with him. Like it was very immature. I will say the counselor was very careful about it. It was like, And do you think that is not good? I just think, like, I still have a dozen wonderful, beloved friends from high school. I'm delighted that you have found it a source of a positive entertainment and joy too.
We both rail a lot of times on social media, but in one respect, things like Facebook have allowed all of us to reconnect with friends that we may have lost touch with from high school. And it's cool. It's cool to be able to reach out and rekindle friendships and just stay in touch with other people that ordinarily we may have never seen again.
Yes. And now we can watch shows online without
Together,
having to see them
apart.
That's
in
right.
real time.
All right. Well, Steve, before we kind of get, kind of close off the interview piece, and I know you said you would hang as long as your battery lasted. What is Steve O'Donnell working on now? Catch us up to 2020 outside of the fact that the pandemic shut a lot of things down earlier this year, but there's always stuff in the works. What's going on with you?
Well, it is pertinent that you mentioned the pandemic, because I don't really know. I may be half retired. I'm not sure. I am writing things. I write things every day. And I've been working on a script with a wonderful writer named Melissa Rossi. That's about Napoleon Bonaparte's family. And it's comic, but, it's also historical, right? So it's perfect for us. Up until the lockdown, I was doing little projects with Norm Macdonald. And while we communicate, we haven't really been doing anything like podcasts. But I do look forward to when that kind of activity can come up again, because that would be a subject for a whole other podcast, is Norm Macdonald, because he's absolutely one of the most perfect, delightful, peculiar people that ever was.
Well, I absolutely loved the Netflix Norm Macdonald Has a Show. I guess he's done one season of that. And
I was only going to mention, we taped dozens of comedy bits for that show and then decided they didn't fit the format. I'm trying to think of some. There's one of the things I keep bothering Norm. Like, let's put them out somewhere. Let's just post them online. I don't even care about money. Just get them on YouTube or something. Or Daily Motion or some such,
Yeah.
And we just taped all these things, and some of them are quite beautiful. But they decided they broke up the interviews and they didn't want to do that. But to me, that would be like a lost episode of the Dana Carvey show or something like that. Just something that would be of interest to a certain number of lunatics like yourself.
I was going to say, sign me up. I'll be the first to subscribe.
Yeah.
Well, I thought his interviews were great. I was really pleasantly surprised. I knew Norm. Knew Norm's work.
He's a smart, weird guy, and who really thinks about things and is really quick too. And I would also say rather devilish. He likes making trouble, not just for himself, but for the people around him as well. I grew up with the big Catholic family, and there's a certain amount of me that's sort of decently reticent and timid and easily blushes and stuff. So it was healthy for me to be around the Lettermans and the Kimmels and the Norm Macdonalds, because all the teasing made you. It was much cheaper than psychotherapy, and it got you to sort of relax into your own selfhood.
Well, I will tell you, one of his guests I do not like. I have never liked, and I won't tell you who that is. If you know me, it won't be hard to guess. But
I'm going to say Jane Fonda.
There you go.
She impressed me as being much more complicated than I had anticipated. And that is what you're probably discovering in the podcast.
I was about to say, yes, that's exactly right.
A 60-minute interview is different from a 5-minute interview. And to discover that she could be such a mixture of things, feminism and yet also kind of a strange dupe of men over years, that she could be intelligent, well-spoken, fluent in French, politically complicated, but still some sympathy there. I was struck that she was pretty quick, because I most Tonight Show or Regis Philbin type interviews, you would never see Jane Fonda getting zingers off, but I thought she was quite quick. So
I had a hard time not liking her by the time it was over.
Well, it's an interesting evolution. That particular interview, I don't know if it's watchable anywhere unless it's box set somewhere, but they start out clearly at odds, and it warms up so that by the time the interview's over, they're sincerely hugging each other, not just in the phony baloney showbiz way, but in a 54% sincere hug at the end of it.
Well, and honestly, I think that's why we love doing this sort of format, because I think people are more complex than what you get in 5-minute sound bites or 10-minute interviews broken up by 2 commercial breaks. And you get to realize there's a lot more to a person than maybe one opinion or one political belief. There's a lot to a person's story, and it's worth listening to.
Yes, absolutely. Well, write a letter to Netflix. Have them bring Norm back.
I will be happy to do that. I'll be happy to lead the charge.
By the way, I'm still someone who suggests writing letters. What's wrong with me?
No, there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. Actually, I'm more apt to now open an actual handwritten letter, whereas I'll probably not even read your email anymore.
Right.
Oh, people stopped reading my emails long ago.
Steve, before we move to our next segment here and we kind of close off the interview piece, where can people interact with you? Do you interact with fans and listeners out there, people who follow you or know you as a writer? Do you Twitter, Facebook? Do you have a website? Do you have anything like that?
Oh dear. I should have prepared better for this, but I'm going to say right now, nowhere.
Nowhere. We just stumbled across you through a friend. That's awesome.
If there wasn't a pandemic going on, I'd say the Dairy Queen down on Sunset.
Funny, that's where Walt is.
Yes, I'm headed there as soon as we're done.
All right, see you later.
Well, Steve, I know we talked at the beginning and you want to hang out with us, so feel free to bring in your comedy riff, whatever pops in your head, because these segments are unscripted, but we have a couple of crazy things we like to do as we start to wind down our show. And the first thing is we go over to Walt for a segment we affectionately call...
Bring out your dead!
Well, today's Bring Out Your Dead is from the Times-Picayune, and this is a little bit older one. This is from August 12th of 2016. I like to get newer stuff, but this one I couldn't pass. This is William Ziegler. He escaped this mortal realm on February 29th, 2016 at the age of 69. We think he did it on purpose to avoid having to make a decision on the pending presidential election, which I guess is kind of timely. He leaves behind 4 children, 5 grandchildren, and the potted meat industry, for which he was an unofficial spokesman until dietary restrictions forced him to eat real food. William volunteered for service in the United States Navy at the ripe age of 17 and immediately realized he didn't much enjoy being bossed around. He only stuck it out for one war. Before his discharge, however, the government exchanged numerous ribbons and medals for various honorable acts. Upon his return to the city of New Orleans in 1971, thinking it best to keep an eye on him, government officials hired William as a fireman. I love that, thinking they need to keep an eye on him. After 25 years, he suddenly realized that running away from burning buildings made much more sense than running towards them, and he promptly retired. Looking back, Williams stated that there was no better group of morons and mental patients than those he had had the privilege of serving with, except Bob. He never liked Bob.
Bob.
Bob must have been a jerk. Following his wishes, there will be no service, but well-wishers are encouraged to write a note of farewell on a Schaefer Light beer can and drink it in his honor. He was never one for sentiment or religiosity, but he wanted you to know that if he owes you a beer and if you can find him in heaven, he will gladly allow you to buy him another one. I love that line. He can likely be found forwarding tasteless internet jokes. Check your spam folders, but don't open these at work. Expect to find an alcoholic dog named Judge passed out at his feet. Unlike previous times, this is not a ploy to avoid creditors or old girlfriends.
Unlike previous attempts to mask his death.
His own death. He assures us that he is gone. He will be greatly missed.
Aw, that's a good one. Whoever wrote that, that was a clever one.
I really like that, and he seems like a really good guy.
I like the idea. I like the idea that there's beer in heaven.
Me too.
I love that.
There's some song about in heaven there is no beer, and I always thought that was extremely depressing.
No, it's supposed to be a happy place, and Lord knows that's where I go for my happy place.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
I don't do these come to you anonymously? I don't mean to gum up the works because it was sort of beautiful. It was like something Groucho Marx might have recited.
Well, every once in a while, one of our listeners or somebody will email me one. This one I just happened to find touring around the obituary sites on the internet today.
Good Lord. So it's a real thing. I thought
that
it was
is
a real obit.
Poem of some
absolutely
sort.
Real. And I always try to confirm that it is actually real and that the person actually existed. And then last week I was outed as not having done that very well.
Well, so we're an entire group of people with one that had been fake posted in a newspaper.
Yes.
And it ended up being a great train of events from earlier in the season. So,
but at least it had been published as an obituary in a newspaper.
Right. So we only say that it's news because we found it online. So it's got to be true.
Right. As long as it's on the internet, it's real.
Right.
It has that pedigree of perfection.
That's exactly right.
It's no bullshit.
Moving to my first news story, we've all been probably stressed of late, and now with the oncoming holidays and still not knowing if we're going to be able to hang out with friends and family, depending where you live, how things are going, there's a lot going on that can be stressful. So here's the latest trend in how to de-stress and to embrace some inner wellness. We've heard of goat yoga before, right? You know, where you kind of you let goats kind of climb over you and they're kind of cute and they're small and they make you feel good. Well, there's another four-legged animal that apparently also can bring some good feelings. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about, Walt?
I'm frighteningly kind of in fear of what you're about to say.
Well, if you were going to say cows, then you would be absolutely correct.
Okay.
Cow cuddling. Yes, during a session of cow cuddling, you get introduced to a cow. Then you get to pet it, hug it, cuddle it, snuggle it, call it George, and you could have your bovine friend until your time runs out for whatever amount you've paid for. A cow hugging session can produce several benefits according to The Week. The cow's warm body and slow heartbeat can promote positive thinking and reduce stress by releasing oxytocin in your brain. Now, oxytocin is a feel-good hormone associated with social bonding, and cuddling with the cow can make you feel loved. So if you've been feeling like no one in this cruel, wretched world cares about you, don't be like that. Go hug a cow. Go hug a cow, man. Don't have a cow. Hug one. Now, this is actually taken from a similar therapy overseas called equine therapy, where you get to hug or hang out with a horse. Now, I'd much rather choose the horse. However, cows have an edge over horses as cuddling partners. According to this story, horses, while always, I shouldn't say always because I know they don't, while usually will remain standing, a cow can be surprisingly dog-like. It will lay down, it will muzzle you, it may even try to get into your lap. Careful on how big that cow is. Now, it can cost about $75 for a session for you to just kind of hang out with a cow. The session will be watched by an animal therapist who will observe the cuddle cow's mood just to make sure the cow doesn't start to get ornery on you. Meanwhile, another staff member will keep an eye out for the other animals just to make sure nobody wants to come and investigate. Now, check this out, and this is why I don't understand why we're paying $75 an hour to hug a cow, because cows apparently are very dog-like. They say the best thing to do is to pet it behind the ears or along the neck. It will let you know if it likes what you're doing because it will stretch out and it might even wag its tail. Otherwise, if you're doing it wrong, it may prod you and tell you and bump you. So they have these other folks around to try to make sure that you are cuddling and scratching the cow properly. I don't know why they didn't just go get a dog.
It's no bullshit.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to save my $75, I think.
I think it eventually leads to cow tipping, though.
Don't forget to tip your cow. That's not what we meant.
which I have done for less than $75.
No, although it could cost you a whole lot more if you're caught.
Yes, or have the cow fall on you.
Oh, that's bad. Oh my goodness. So I just thought there are people out there looking for any way to try to give you a new way to de-stress. I just think there's so many dogs or cats that could be rescued. Find one of them, bring them home, and you'll have a friend for a long, long time.
Yeah, and that's weird. That's weird. Okay, well, I have our next news story. Not to be let down. Pole dancing skeletons must be removed, HOA tells homeowner.
Wait a minute, it's Halloween.
I know. Well, you're going to love this, Alan. Richmond, Texas, KTRK from Texas tells us that a woman is going head to head with her homeowners association after complaints were filed over her inappropriate Halloween decorations that show skeletons dancing on poles.
Well, what's wrong with that? Oh, I guess they're naked.
Oh, well, yeah. So there are actually pictures. You need to go take a look at this. Angela Nevada lives in the community in Richmond. She received a letter on Sunday saying she has 30. Now, remember, she just got this letter on Sunday. She has 30 days to remove the decorations.
No problem.
Yeah, which will be well past Halloween. The letter said the decorations are offensively positioned. It's modeled after an adult club, she says. We just really had a good time changing the scene up every night. Every night we change the position of the skeletons, and it's really been just a great creative outlet for me.
Oh, that would be incredible. Okay, you know what? My wife, she had a client that she used to support a while ago that she would drive to that person's house. And at Halloween, there was somebody that lived on the corner lot that had 7 or 8 anatomically correct size skeletons. And they would pose them in a different pose every day, including one day showing them all like in a kayak in the front yard or a canoe.
That's awesome.
Setting up a tent, building a snowman. They would just pose them every day, and people would drive by just to see what were the skeletons doing today. I think that's really
fantastic.
creative.
Yeah, that's great. Well, she said that the idea came up in the early stages of the pandemic, which I can understand. We've all been cooped up, and it's been just a terrible year, she said. We've just decided if this brings a little bit of joy and a little bit of smile to everyone's face, then we're doing everything right. She said the no neighbors have approached her with complaints, but so far, up until this letter that I received last night, everybody who's come by has been incredibly supportive, and my neighbors love it. Eyewitness News reached out to the community HOA on Monday, but has not received a response. Meanwhile, Nava said that since Halloween is this weekend and it falls within the deadline, she's going to leave her decorations in the yard. When I got the letter, I was a little sad, Nava said. I thought, okay, I'm just going to take it down. I'm going to comply. I'm going to take it down and just not do this anymore. But then I got so much support from Facebook and so many friends, I said, forget it. People are having so much fun with this. They love it. I'm going to continue to do it.
It's no bullshit.
I love it. You know what? I wonder who the one person is. It's just that one. It's the, to pull back from our guest's background with the Dana Carvey show. I almost see like the church lady in the subdivision, the one that's just like all up in like, so you've got all these skeletons in your yard. Mm-hmm. People like that just enjoy the holiday. Geez, we haven't had a whole lot to be happy about this year. Can't you have a little sense of humor?
Or if it's not something you find funny, do something else.
Go by the house. Oh my God. Unless you live next door, and apparently they don't.
And then, just lighten up, people.
I just actually went while you did that. I pulled the story up. I just did pole dancing skeletons, Texas. Which, by the way, I got to be careful. I don't want my browser all of a sudden showing me going something else. But it's innocuous at best. I mean, they are all wearing wigs, but beyond that, they're all skeletons. It's hysterical.
Well, and you know me, I'm if there's a prude on this podcast, that would be me, I guess. But it's just funny.
Right.
It's just funny. So lighten up.
Yeah. Lighten up, Francis.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I've got the last news story, and this time we're going to go back to where we kind of started at the beginning of the season with looking for a dumb criminal. This guy should have realized that he was due for a life of crime because his last name is Crook, Lawrence Crook.
Oh, great.
From Jersey City. He's been found charged with first-degree larceny, possession of a controlled substance, possession of drug paraphernalia, but that's only for the first incident because Mr. Crook managed to find himself in police custody twice in one day. Let's go back to the beginning. According to Lieutenant Antonio Granada, police were called to a condo after they got a report of a suspicious male. Now, witnesses told officers they saw the man looks like he was removing from a small dumpster in the area some packages that had been placed inside. Well, he was moving them back and forth to a black SUV. So The police officer said he was seen loading the blue and white striped bags into the vehicle. When he was confronted by the witness, a brief conversation ensued, and the male quickly fled on foot, which prompted a call to police. The SUV was reported stolen from a Bayside Queen car dealership, Granada said. A male matching the description was found thanks to a witness in the area of Pequot Avenue, and he was identified as Lawrence Crook. Officers later confirmed it to be the same suspect through surveillance video, a canine tracking dog, and the witness who actually confronted Crook. Granada said that Crook was found in possession of suspected methamphetamine along with drug paraphernalia. The suspect was also seen loading the blue and white striped bag. So he was taken to jail, and Crook was arrested and eventually released after posting a $300 bond and signing a promise to appear in court notice. Well, less than an hour after being released, police were called again, this time to a Fairfield Fire Department, where they found Crook in the fire department headquarters. He was walking around the apparatus floor, rummaging through the property of the firemen. Police responded and arrested him again. Crook now has 2 separate bonds, each with $25,000, and is awaiting disposition for both charges.
It's amazing. It's astounding. But it's no bullshit.
Yes, a man who lives up to the family name, a double crook in one day.
What a jackass.
A man named Crook gets arrested twice.
Imagine that.
Sounds like talk about Groucho or this sounds like a Groucho Marx kind of thing. Man named Crook arrested twice. Man,
and this is not our first multiple arrests in a day story.
No, but first one ever named Crook.
That is true. That is true.
So, all right. We got to move to our final segment now, and we'll put our guest perhaps a little on the spot, but he'll be able to pick up and follow along with us. We like to call it our entertainment section. It's what we're watching, what are we reading, and what are we listening to. So let's go ahead and go to Walt first. Let's start off with, what are you watching? What are you streaming? Anything that you've watched in the last week that's worth maybe recommending or maybe warning the listeners about?
Actually, everything that I've been watching this week has been good. So I'm still watching Halt and Catch Fire. I stalled out a little bit just because I got a little busy, but that's still a great show. I'm almost done with season 2. Really well written and acted. I highly recommend it. Also, I think I texted you about this, Alan. I've stumbled across a show called Neat, The Story of Bourbon.
Yes, you texted me, and I need to watch that.
Yeah, it is great. It's on Hulu. It's a documentary, and it goes into the history of bourbon, how bourbon's made, the different types of bourbon, what makes bourbon bourbon. I mean, it is a really awesome show. I actually recommended it to a couple of people who are bourbon fanatics, and they were just blown away by it. So if you're a bourbon fan, or even if you're not, it is a really fascinating history. It goes into a lot of, Kentucky and, that whole region and how this all started. So highly, highly recommend it. Again, it's called Neat, The Story of Bourbon. It's on Hulu, and it's an hour and 10 minutes. It's really great. And then I saw today that season 2, I guess, of My Next Guest Needs No Introduction, the David Letterman show on Netflix has now come out. So I will be diving into that this week and checking out his interviews with those guests this season. So definitely worth watching any of those 3.
And it's called My Guest Needs No Introduction?
That is it.
All right. And it's on Netflix.
It's on Netflix. You'll see David Letterman with his big, long beard. So
got it. All right. So let's go to our guest, Steve, with this downtime. And I don't know how much you watch, maybe of the competition or maybe movies or what you make. Maybe
I'm going to depart entirely from the spirit of your segment by mentioning several books I've read in the last couple months, deliberately chosen because I remembered them having lots of descriptions of oppressive loneliness and cooped upness. And they were all really pretty good. I'd read them all decades ago, but still have them around. Robinson Crusoe. It's so with him notching the days on the tree to keep track of how long he's been on the island. I forgot there was so much Jesus in it. There's a lot of talk about Bible quoting. There's a lot of Bible quoting, but it's really quite entertaining. And because it's like 400 years old now, the language is very colorful, but you do feel for his loneliness. And I definitely identify because I'm in lockdown here in Los Angeles. And the other one, Count of Monte Cristo. Did you ever read that?
Great book. I was just going to ask if you read that.
Yeah. Well, the prison part is the only part that's any good. The part where he's out trying to make a name for himself in society sucks. But when he's in prison and he gets to know the other prisoner through the wall, that to me, I identified with, like, oh, I'm sort of getting to know that person on the balcony across the valley, from the lockdown. And the other one, strangely enough, maybe a book you remember from childhood, The Borrowers, a kid's book.
Yeah, they made that into a movie.
Tiny people. Yeah, they're like an inch tall and they live under the house. And the daughter is very restless and complains to the parents that she can't be cooped up any longer. She's got to get out. She's got to go out into the yard. They're very coy about saying you could get eaten by a bird or a cat or something like that. But the restless younger generation that doesn't want to be cooped up during in fact, they even say the only reason to go out is to get provisions, is to get food. And I go like, that's exactly like me.
Yeah, you can really relate to that.
So those are not electronic entertainments, but they have definitely occupied me over the last few weeks.
For me, sticking to what we're watching, Walt, I actually finally, I know it was a big deal a few years ago. They were talking about doing The Killing Joke as a actual animated movie for Warner Brothers. They were going to take Alan Moore's comic book of the Joker and Batman. That was really kind of an R-rated graphic novel soul story, and they turned it into an animated cartoon to watch the story. And it had Mark Hamill as the Joker, who, of course, a lot of people like Mark Hamill doing the voice of the Joker. And I was really excited to watch it because it popped up as maybe for this season, for Halloween, this would be something to watch. I found it kind of dull and boring and didn't enjoy it at all. The comic book was so much better. So I'm going to say if you're a fan of the Joker, that Mark Hamill does, you might enjoy the voiceover work, but story-wise, it left a lot to be desired.
Wow.
Yeah, I did not like it at all. So that was the only new thing I watched this past week. I keep meaning to get to my Halloween movies and still haven't made time. I've got Poltergeist queued up. I got to watch that this week before the magic event. This episode will have dropped afterwards, but I mean, that is the one I have to watch on the serious ghost side. The other one I'll be watching on the funny ghost side, which is my favorite other ghost comedy or movie, would be Ghostbusters.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. You can't pass that one up during Halloween.
Not at all. Those are my two favorite ghost stories. Just one from a serious side and one from a comedy side. Okay. All right, Walt, let's go up to what you're reading. We already got Steve's reading list, which, by the way, Robinson Crusoe is fabulous, just to go back and read and hear the language of an author from centuries ago, but so is The Count of Monte Cristo. I've always loved that revenge story, and there's a couple of movies based on that as well, including of the same name, that are worth watching, but it's a much better book, so check it out. What are you reading?
I am still really just getting going on the Seinfeld book. I've just not had a whole lot of time to read this week, so hopefully by next week I'll be done with that and ready to give kind of a full review, but it is it's pure Seinfeld. It's hilarious and great so far. So check it out if you haven't already, but it's a great book.
Excellent. Steve, I know we got your reading list, so I will pop right ahead. We've got the 5th of November coming up. No matter what, we've got an election on the 3rd. We're going to have either half the country in a malaise and the other half rejoicing on the 4th. But I've always been a fan of the phrase in the poem, remember the 5th of November. Thanks to Alan Moore once again in the comic book graphic novel 10-part series V for Vendetta. I love the movie adaptation, and so I have gone back into my comic book collection from when I was a kid, and I've pulled up V for Vendetta, and I am rereading what a masterful story it was from Alan Moore, and getting ready to, as I always try to do on the 5th of November, my rewatching of V for Vendetta. So I'm in the middle of rereading an old comic book from I think it was in the late 80s is the publication date. So I'm very much enjoying the story of a government that tries to manipulate its people by first making them sick and then coming up with a cure for the pandemic.
Interesting. Well, Alan Moore is really a fascinating writer.
Oh yeah, but he's crazy.
He is nuts. But I've read a couple, of course, The Watchmen and
Watchmen is great. I think if you like The Watchmen, V for Vendetta, I think is better than The Watchmen because it's not trying to be a comic book story or like a action hero story.
Right. And then he's also written a couple of actual novels, right?
I haven't read anything that he's done other than the graphic novels that he either partners with an artist but tells the stories in comic book form. I just think he's sort of like my generation's version of Neil Gaiman, who came along later, who just has these wonderful, like complex and interesting stories that are just told in comic book form.
Okay. Yeah. And he is a really prolific writer. So really check out just about anything by him and you're going to be happy.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to circle around to our final thing as we get ready to close out the show. What are you listening to, whether it's music, a new album, or if you've got a list of podcasts you want to give a shout out to? Walt?
Yeah, I'll give two podcasts and then an album, actually. There's a podcast that my buddy Bill Lampkin just recommended to me called In the Red Clay. And it is about the Dixie Mafia, if you're familiar with that. They are a bunch of just real nasty backwood redneck guys.
Well, since I've watched Justified and you haven't yet, the Dixie Mafia plays into those storylines. Yeah,
that's right. And they're tough, moonshiners and stuff like that. In the Red Clay goes through the life and history of some of those guys, and they interview. Primarily, one of the guys being interviewed is the son of one of the worst hitmen in the Dixie Mafia. And it is really well done, really well put together. I'm on, I think, episode 7 or 8 out of 10 on this, and it is really worth listening to. So if you're looking for a new podcast, after you get done with this one, In the Red Clay is fantastic. Also, my friend Kari Green has a show called Basking in the Shade, and it is not what I would typically listen to. However, she and her podcast partner are so funny and entertaining. It's definitely worth listening to. Just kind of cover a variety of topics based on what they're thinking that day. But it's called Basking in the Shade. It's available on any podcatcher. And then the final thing is Tom Petty. There's a re-release of his Wildflowers album. And a couple years ago, somebody who was like a Tom Petty, kind of does what your brother does, where they play all the songs of certain,
like a cover band.
Cover band. Thank you. But somebody who led a cover band of Tom Petty's music told me that he thought that Wildflowers was Tom Petty's best album. And I was like, I don't know, Damn the Torpedoes. And I mean, just had so many good ones, but they just re-released Wildflowers. It's called Wildflowers and All the Rest, the deluxe edition. 24 songs by Tom Petty, and I think it is his best work. It is so good, and it's about 2 hours of music, and I just turned it on while I was driving through South Georgia the other day and listened, and it is really, really good. So if you're a Tom Petty fan, if you're just a fan of good music, this is a fantastic album, definitely worth taking the time to check out.
Very cool. All right, Steve, what about you? Anything you would recommend that you might be listening to, whether it's a podcast or an album?
Well, I don't want to slow down your program anymore. I'll mention one history podcast that I go to all the time and am always intrigued and entertained. It's Hollywood history, and it's called You Must Remember This. And it isn't nostalgia and gossip. These are real, interesting, novelistic, scholarly, historic descriptions of different personalities and scandals and problems and triumphs from Hollywood history. A lot of them from the 20s, 30s, 40s, a kind of a golden age. Mm-hmm. But they really do an excellent job. They really know the studios and the executives and the detectives and the newspaper columnists and the supporting people. It's really fantastic.
That sounds cool. I actually love podcasts like that, especially when it's got sort of a storytelling, but it's historical, but it's doing it in a way that keeps you entertained. I love that.
Yeah, yeah, and you think you know all this Hollywood history, you know Bogart and McCall and stuff, but you don't really. This is like real detailed stuff told with a real flair. I love it.
Excellent.
Wow.
Anything else that you're listening to that you'd recommend? Because that's that one I'm
Well,
going to add to my subscription list.
It may be like you. I end up listening to podcasts by people I sort of know. You know, Adam Carolla and Conan O'Brien, and my wonderfully named friend Wheezy Palanker has a very entertaining show. But and Scott Aukerman has the comedy Bang Bang. Do you ever listen to that?
Yeah, that is one of my favorite podcasts.
Oh, good. All right. Well, I have nothing else to say.
And his TV show was the comedy Bang Bang TV show with Scott Aukerman was absolutely unbelievably funny.
I agree. And there was a Letterman flavor to it as well.
There definitely was.
All right. Well, I always try to give the shout out to a bunch of the podcasts that we have, I listen to weekly or bi-weekly, depending on how often their episodes come out. We try to give a lot of love for those folks because they try to do the same thing back for us. The difference, which Steve, I don't know if you've noticed this, especially working with Norm Macdonald, when you're on TV, you're trying to win market share all the time. You're not sharing anything. You probably aren't propping anybody up. You're trying to figure out how to win the audience. The podcast market seems to be dynamically opposite of that. It's about we all can succeed by all working together because we've all got interesting stories to tell, different ways of doing it. And so we love giving a shout out to our podcast friends that have either been with us on the show or who we listen to. And that would include folks like the Marine Corps Movie Minute, the guys from the Rocky Minute, guys from the Indiana Jones Minute, all of them looking at those movie franchises 1 minute of the movie at a time. I'll also give a shout out to some that do sort of the Seinfeld view of the world where whatever happens to pop in their heads any given day, the Real Queens of Queens, the Bad Cop show, and my good buddies overseas in the UK, 60MW podcast, used to be called 60 Minutes With, but too many times they were getting hate mail from the 60 Minutes watchers thinking that they had stumbled on the podcast for the news show, and it wasn't. It was entertainment driven, not safe for work, but always lots of fun. So just a handful of the shows. I didn't give all of them. I try to do them different every week, but check those out, and I think you will enjoy them for their individual looks at movies or culture or just commenting on things that are happening in the day. With that said, Walt, before we let our guest go, maybe they heard about Steve joining us, and maybe this is their very first episode ever listening to us, so how can they learn more about us?
Well, 2 places you want to check out. The easiest one is our website, thewilderride.com. You'll have a few minutes there to check out our biographies, check out our past episodes, including our first 2 seasons, which covered the works of Gene Wilder, and we covered Young Frankenstein, which is very apropos for this week, and Blazing Saddles. Broke those down 1 minute at a time, so you can check those out. And then all of our guests and episodes from this season where we've been interviewing friends and friends of friends who are interesting to us. And so be sure and see what you can see there. Also, go to facebook.com/thewilderride and follow us there, and then join our listeners group. And our listeners group is just all entertainment, no religion or news or, anything like that. It's just news of entertainment and fun stuff and a little discussion about our show. So those are the 2 best places to find out about us.
Excellent. As we begin to wrap up, Steve, I want to say thank you for taking a couple of hours out of your day and hanging out in our lounge. It has been, I think we probably could have let you just go for another couple of hours, and we probably need to have you back just to continue to chat about some of the things that we didn't get a chance to talk to this time.
I'd love to talk about my twin brother. He was quite a character, but you're nice to have had me. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Steve, thank you so much.
All right, folks, come on back. Okay, come on back next week for a brand new episode. You'll never know who we have unless you're subscribed and you listen here to the Wilder Ride Listeners Lounge. Steve, thank you. That was just the stories. It felt like Walt texted me during that and said, "Are you still there?" I'm like, "I'm just sitting back listening. This is fascinating."
Well, I think it was a little disorganized, but I just sort of rambled.
But that's our show.
Oh, yeah. Welcome to the Wilder Ride.
Yes, well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, Steve, thank you so much.
All right. Well, I hope I get to meet you sometime in the future, after the near future, when people are actually meeting each other.
As soon as we can travel again, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So
Take
long,
care,
you
buddy.
guys.
Alrighty.
Hey, thank you, Steve.
Bye-bye.